Welcome to Mindfulness Unscripted. I'm your host, Jon Orsini. Take a big breath in. Here we go. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to start this podcast because I just felt like it was a good way to connect with people like yourself who I think are so incredibly interesting and that I'm so grateful to know and that I don't always get to see as much as I'd like to. And then yeah, and then also like we have these just great conversations and inspiring conversations and to share them. And I know that like everybody has a podcast, it feels like, and blah, 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 or whatever. But I was like, if I took that point of view when I started acting, when I was like 18, 20 years old, if I took the point of view of oversaturation as being a barometer for whether I should do something or not, I never would have been an actor. At this point with the internet, you'd never do anything if you were concerned about oversaturation because now everything from all over the world is on the internet. So to me, I was just like, you know what? This is a radical expression of being myself and having open-hearted conversations on this format. And I just can't wait to talk to my friends on here.
I feel that. I totally feel that. And I think that right now is like the best time to possibly do something like this. I think people are really craving authentic conversations and authentic, connections. Considering the weird social media echo chamber that we're always constantly in, I think just face to face, like real conversations is going to be a really important thing moving forward here for sure.
Yeah. And like all to that point, the division that everybody knows that we experience in our culture and like you're saying, the echo chambers of social media, I'm like, we all have way more in common than we have different. And I know a lot of open-hearted, open-minded people that are like in private conversations will be like, I feel ostracized because like this new whatever like the topic of the day comes out and they're just like, I'm not sure if I lean this way or that way with this particular topic, but I want to be able to ask some questions about it, but I don't want to get in trouble for asking questions to try to understand what's happening from a fuller perspective. But it's not even like having a differing point of view. It's like people feel like they're going to get in trouble, or I'll use I statements, right? Sometimes even I feel like I would get in trouble for asking a question, an open-hearted, genuine question, not even like agreeing or disagreeing or taking a contrarian point of view or whatever, but just being like, wait, okay, so I see the point of view on this, but how does this make sense with that, and not to disagree with it, but to literally ask, you know what I mean? And that, so anyways, but when you have conversations like this, like people actually tend to listen to each other better when it's in an open-hearted space. And that was one of my big goals with this.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I honestly, I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like there's something that's been kind of, I mean, everything is obviously very like intense right now. And I think a lot of people sometimes dismiss the notion of intention being a very important thing. And if you don't know something, that you should be able to ask a question and have a thoughtful conversation about it. Because there's no way to learn anything if everybody feels like they're walking on eggshells all the time.
Yeah.
And whether it's a question that I don't know, maybe other people feel like we should know the answers to or something, like if the intention is there that you actually like you're asking it because you want to learn something and you're actually very curious about the other person's point of view, like I mean, I feel like that needs to be really, that's a really important thing that I feel like sometimes is lost in translation. People feel like I don't know, I saw somebody post a couple days ago just about how it doesn't necessarily matter if somebody says they don't mean to do something because they did it and the effect is there. And I'm like, well, wait a second, like there's a lot of nuance, I think, there, and a lot of things that I obviously can't speak to, depending on, I don't know, people's life experience and race and things like that. There's obviously things that like I have no experience with, but I feel like intentionality is always a very important thing, and I think that's something that's kind of been lost in a lot of ways, in terms of conversation,
Yeah.
and leaving that open for people to have authentic connections.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's beautifully said. And I hear you. I remember, when I was little and I was growing up, my dad was involved in town politics. He always felt like my dad and my grandfather always felt like it was really important to be engaged civically with your community.
mm-hmm.
And so, just long story short, I remember one time I was probably about like 8 or 10 years old, and I remember one time my dad was running for this certain position and the numbers were coming in, and I was looking at the photo of my dad and then the photo of the other guy that he was running against, and I was looking back and forth and these numbers were coming in, and I was like, Dad, wait, if you think you're right and he thinks he's right, which one of you is right? And my dad said, neither of us is right.
Mm-hmm.
People have different points of view based on their life experience. So rather than judging someone for what they think, try to understand why they think it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, sometimes that is way easier said than done. And sometimes that's a futile exercise if the person you're talking to is just a brick wall of close off. But that's why like openness is openness, closedness is closedness, no matter where you land on a subject. And again, like you're saying, there's all kinds of different places people are coming from. And I know, like, me being me, there's a certain degree of safety that even if someone is like has some radical point of view, I can sit there and be like, well, this isn't necessarily going to affect me directly, being like a straight white guy or things like that. So I'm fully aware of all of that on my end. Um, but I guess at the core of it, again, is this feeling and this sense that I have that I'm like, I have a lot of friends who I agree with on a lot of things, but if I observe them in conversation or observe them in certain things, like they're closed off.
Mm-hmm.
And again, sometimes for very understandable reasons, but the point is, if we're trying to make things better, it requires an openness of dialogue. And I guess the one other thing I'll say about it is this idea that, like, just like in one-on-one relationships, like I read a lot of relationship psychology when I was in a particularly difficult relationship at some point. I read all these books on relationship psychology. And just like in a one-on-one relationship, it's like you might be disagreeing. If you can identify the goal, right? Like if you can identify the overarching goal, then you can have this dialogue about the best way to achieve that goal. And it's in fact okay, and sometimes even helpful when you disagree, because you're both working towards the same goal, and it's okay to have differing points of view on how to get there. Mm-hmm. So I think what gets lost is, like, people will agree on something and think that they're cohesive, but they actually have a different goal. So they might agree on this one thing, but they actually have a different, bigger goal. And then other people might completely disagree on something, but actually have the same goal, ultimate goal in mind. So they're actually, we have far more alike than different. And so, yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally feel you. Yeah. I always feel like, they're really, when I work with my students, it's like there's never really a wrong or a right way to do something. It's all dependent on the goal. Like, of course, I don't know, if you're talking about music or something, like if somebody wants to sing, like, anybody can sing, but like if somebody wants to sing like Whitney Houston, they're gonna have to have a very specific set of steps that they have to, adhere to in order to achieve that level of mastery. So yeah, it really is, I think, goal dependent. And I do feel like, we all have much more in common than we would maybe like to, that we maybe realize. I think it's going to take a lot of authentic conversations and people who are willing to be fearless in those spaces to uncover some of that stuff and form a dialogue, because I feel like, just community and unity is going to be so important moving forward here. Like, especially we're just in such a weird place right now with everything. Especially like young kids who are growing up, like this is all they know. They only know, the social media echo chambers, just living life online, connecting with people online and things like that. And while you can form very authentic and real communities with people who are far away online through Zoom and through, other platforms and things, I think one of the most important things is just getting to know your neighbors, getting to know people who are directly next to you, and forming bonds with them so that you can build a strong foundation and community with those people. To be honest, like, if things ever hit the fan, these are the people that you're going to rely on. These are the people that you're going to have to trust and work with, that are right directly next to you. So I think that's so important. And I think what you said is so beautifully stated, and very elegantly said, for sure.
Same here. And so I want to dive into music, and I want to dive into art. Like, you're insanely talented, and your husband Will. I mean, you guys, like, I want to dive into all this because it's just, there's so much beautiful work going on. And I just want to say one more thing about you just said about the community that's right in front of you. Mm-hmm. Your neighbors is the fires, these really tragic fires that just happened in Los Angeles. I've
Terrible.
seen a lot of different things. Like on the unfortunate end is how is the contentiousness of the politicalization of it and people at each other's throats. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be, like, there needs to be discussions about what happened, what could have gone better, but again, there's the big difference between, like, how do we make this better, how do we come together and make this better from a core space versus blame, 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 because that's just a never-ending road to continued destruction. But to the point about the neighbors, is on the best end of this, I've seen people say how beautiful residents of Los Angeles have come together in the grocery store saying, like, do you need help, or like, what's going on with you? And there's this sense of catharsis, this sense of you are not alone, this sense of, okay, like, let's transcend our disagreements and differences to be here for each other. And that as much as we can be cynical or get down about humanity as a whole, or like human beings as a species, in times of crisis, we see time and time again that humans actually transcend a lot of bullshit. In so many cases, they transcend things. Like, I, as a somewhat sometimes cynical person, would be like, oh gosh, this or that, but like, we see in these times of crisis that humans transcend this and transcend their differences to come together and support each other in these ways that I just can't even believe sometimes, it's because it's so beautiful and supportive.
Mhm.
And it reminds me, just a bullet point, it reminds me of this book called Tribe by this journalist Sebastian Younger, great writer. He wrote The Perfect Storm.
Okay.
Yeah, great writer and wonderful journalist and really fascinating guy and thinker. And he wrote this book called Tribe, and it was talking about the Blitz in England, in London, and talking about these times of crisis where humans come together to support each other. And so now the thing is, how do we do that all the time and not need a crisis? You know what I mean? Just to do it, to realize we have to be there for each other, you know?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I totally feel that. I think one thing that I time and time again, I think it really comes down to example, just being an example in the way
Mm,
we can show up in whatever moment we're in. And obviously, our best is going to vary from day to day. But the reality is, we can't control anybody else. Like, no matter what we would ever do, no matter how much we would want to, we have no control over what other people decide to do and their choices that they make. And honestly, there's layers there, but I don't feel like we ever should. I feel like everybody is obviously is sovereign and should be able to make their own choices and do as they do while we're here for this incredibly short amount of time.
mm,
Um, but with that being said, too, I feel like one thing that I'm incredibly passionate about is empowering other people in their own creativity
mm,
and their own authenticity, because I truly feel like our society as a whole has been our creativity has been hijacked by this capitalist mentality, in the sense that we feel and equate the creative process with a product that then needs to be consumed by somebody else. When creativity is so much more simple and essential and deeper than that.
mm,
Um, I've just come across so many people who just will be like, "Oh, I'm not creative, or I can't really do that thing, or whatever." And I'm like, creativity doesn't have anything to do with making something. It's literally, what is it but putting something new into a blank space, whether it's a brushstroke or a sound, or literally I mean, right now the biggest canvas is the future. It's the biggest empty space of all. Every moment we're putting a brushstroke there. We don't have to necessarily even do anything. We can literally just lay in bed all day long, and you're still creating. You're still participating in the creative process, just because we are subject to time. We are in this momentum that, ultimately, I mean, there's layers there. I don't think time is necessarily a real thing, but we are in it nonetheless, and we're experiencing it, and it's the way that we create, and so we're constantly a part and in collaboration with the creative process, through our thinking, through our communication with people. I mean, really, our lives are you know, in the realest sense, like, this is our biggest art project, and there's not a right or a wrong way to do it. Outside of what I was saying before, it's dependent on your goal. If you have a specific goal, if you want to get better in one certain way, then you're going to have to take a certain few steps to achieve that. And I think, being the best example that we can is a really, really powerful creative act, because it's showing other people that we can stand authentically in our own power, which then, I think ultimately inspires other people to at least recognize, oh, I can actually do the same freaking thing because I'm also a human being. And like, when you understand that you're a creative being in and of yourself and you have all the power that you could ever want right now in this moment, it makes you feel less like a victim and makes you want to be more collaborative with the community that's around you, because you realize that you're the one that's creating your own perspective on every moment in your life, and all it takes is just a little shift there, um, in order to, show up in a way that is not only beneficial for the community that's around you, but also for yourself. Empowering people in that way is just, I truly feel like if people really stepped into what they were actually able to do, and really stepped into their own creative power, our world would be so, so much better.
Mm.
Yeah. Because again, I just feel like we always equate like the creative act with making something, and it doesn't have anything to do with that at all. It's just so much more streamlined than that.
Yeah.
Uh, we're just all like so occupied with like trying to become something instead of just embracing this present moment, right? And that's where all of our creative power is right here.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and it makes a lot of sense. And like you're saying, making something not only to be consumed by other people, but to be approved by other people, to be purchased by other people. So I feel like Rick Rubin talks about that stuff a lot, like creating from your creativity, from yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're creating from the space of will people like it, how can I sell it, and all this stuff, it's like, of course that makes sense, especially if you're making your living as an artist, which we both have done and do. um of course that voice is going to come in to be like, well, what do people want from me and how can I deliver that, which is a very different experience than creating authentically, which can be, like you're saying, empowering. It could be a contribution to your community. And this is just coming up, so I'm going to say this too. To me, I always grew up, I got really interested in filmmaking from like films of the 70s. I was
Mm-hmm.
interested in acting, like that artists, I'm saying used to be, and then I'll qualify all that. But I feel like artists used to be rebels, like used to be the people who were willing. I'm thinking like Patti Smith, like like New York City, like old school, right? But like
Yeah,
all over the
yeah.
place, like artists were rebels because they were observing society with a keen observation and willing to call things out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we've hit a stride, whether it's in the entertainment industry or whatever, where it's like, say what you're expected to say. And again, whether you agree or disagree with what's being said, to me, like shelve that. I mean, obviously it's important, and I'm not saying forget it, but I'm saying like shelve that. The idea is that you're expected to say what you're supposed to say, whatever that thing is. And I think artists need, like, we need to step, and I definitely want to hear your perspective on this as a visual artist and as a musician. Like, I feel like as artists, like artists need to, like, I'll say we, although I'm not even sure if I'm an artist, but like we need to step into that rebelliousness, that willingness to kind of hold the mirror up to nature, as they say with Shakespeare, like hold the mirror up to nature, say like, look at this, like, and to not just say what's expected or how comedy in a lot of different ways. Like some comedians have really stepped up to the plate, but other comedians, they just say the joke that's expected because they don't want to get in trouble or like whatever. And there's all fine lines there. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm speaking in a broad sense right now. But like part of what makes something funny is being like, oh my God, they just said that. Or, oh my God, that's so true. And nobody wanted to say it. And they just said that. Like there's this sense of, or the unexpected, like, so anyways, I just think there's this rebelliousness that I would love to see make a comeback, whether it's in films or different art. So yeah, what's your perspective on that as someone who creates so much art, again, visually as well as music?
Well, I just feel like it's commercialization. It's like I feel like cash is king in a lot of ways in America's society here, and that's how a lot of people see it. And I feel like, um, yeah, I think everything is just like kind of just watered down in a way, just to be palatable to
Mm.
people, to keep everybody, from um I mean, just really, I think in a lot of ways, just to keep people keep consuming. It's like instead of looking inside. I mean, that's this tale as old as time, right? It's like we're always looking for something outside of us to fill that big gaping hole that's like usually there, and it really just takes ultimately doing some inner work and not necessarily looking for anything outside to fill that. And it's one thing to know that because like every guru ever has said something to that effect, but there's levels of knowing too. I feel like it's one thing to like know and understand that and be like, okay, I've heard that a million times, and I know that, yeah, I have to look inside to like fill this thing instead of this commercialization of art and the rest of the world. But like it really is true when you do take a deep look inside and dissect the things that you believe and why you believe them and why you feel like those beliefs are actually benefiting you in your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
But I know you mentioned that you said you didn't know if you were an artist, but I truly, truly feel like everybody, like I just want everybody to own that you are literally like not only an artist but a freaking master,
Mm.
because again, like life is the biggest art project of all, it really truly is, and it's like we're here and we're living in this intense contrast, and nothing necessarily, everything is totally neutral, but we are artists who we get to choose what it means, and we get to choose how we want to perceive all of this intense contrast that is again inherently neutral. But you know maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's partly because our brains are pattern learning machines in a way, where we're constantly looking for patterns and things like that. But I feel like we all really are like insane masters, and I that's again, like I think that's probably one of the things that I'm really touching on underneath the creativity stuff. It's like, we are literally creating every single moment, and there's nothing more, there's been no point in our lives that have been more important than this moment,
Mm.
because this is the place that we're creating from, and we've never lived anywhere outside of this moment, which is
Right.
kind of crazy hard for our brains to wrap ourselves around. But I mean, the past we're recreating right now through remembering it. It's not actually happening. The events have happened, but the story that we're telling ourselves about it has not.
Mm.
So it's really shifting our perspective on those stories and telling our something that's more empowering, so we can use, like, the brushstroke of the moment to make an art piece that is not only beneficial for us and our own growth, but beneficial for all the people that we interact with, from in our day-to-day lives. What an amazing, I am always just in awe. It's like such an amazing tapestry. Like there's no way for us to actually really grasp it from a human standpoint.
Mm.
But we're all like puzzle pieces, right? It's like,
Yeah.
there's a beautiful picture at the end, but unless we each stand in our own creative authenticity and like exactly what we are, and kind of rebel again against like this commercialization stuff and trying to be like everything else, like that's the only way we're going to make the best possible picture, because nobody wants a picture with every puzzle piece the exact same. It's like, what
Sure.
is that? Like there's got to be some nuance in there, and I think it's just so important for us to like to understand how rare of a jewel like each of us are, and just how, not only that, but we're never separate, we're always connected, because our puzzle piece influences the entire picture. If our thing is out of place, then we're not going to be able to make the picture that's destined to be.
That's
So
beautiful. I love that. I'm thinking as you're saying this and imagine and picturing this puzzle with all different shapes and everything, like you're saying. Um, the idea when I'm thinking of rebelliousness and what that means right now, it's almost like, and this would be a whole other deep dive, but it's almost like the establishment, right? It's like art was always like, let's fight the establishment. And what I think is interesting, it's like the establishment, no matter how you look at it, I'm not even talking left or right or whatever, like call it whatever you want to call it, um or think of it however you want to think of it, but the establishment, it seems like whoever you want to blame or not blame or whatever, it seems to want us to be at odds with each other, because again, that gets more clicks, that gets more views, that gets more time on like the dying media landscape, right? Like this panic porn or this outrage porn, as they sometimes call it, right? So like the establishment wants us at odds with each other, so it almost seems like the most rebellious thing we can do from art is to accept and commune with each other. Like
Mhm.
to actually be open hearted almost seems like the most rebellious thing we could do. Like to actually listen to people with other points of view and be like, okay, where's the through line here? Or maybe our goal is the same, even though we present completely differently and we come off completely differently. So it almost seems like the most rebellious thing we can do is like connect in that puzzle. Be like, yeah, we're all unique puzzle pieces, but guess what? We can connect in this puzzle, and fuck the man,
Yeah,
like whatever. Like this is
yeah,
we can be
totally.
together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, honestly, and yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of that, I mean, artists for all of time, it's like, they're, and the quote unquote establishment, they've always been trying to use, I don't know, they've always been trying to, you know, consolidate kind of their viewpoint in a sense of control by, through many different means. Like, religion was obviously over the millennia a huge thing for a lot of um, political organizations around around the world. They kind of use that as like almost a weapon in some ways, and take it out of the context of what they actually mean in the teachings of those religions. So it's definitely not a new thing for sure, but I think the newest thing is like that we're so saturated with it all the time, and it's like uh, we're constantly supposed to. They want us to constantly be put into this like state of outrage where it's like, we're constantly engaging with the things that we don't necessarily want.
Mm.
It's like, and when you're engaging with the stuff that you don't necessarily want to see in the world, like what are you doing inherently? You're bringing more of that into play. It's
Mm.
like, if you have, I don't know. I mean, if you're making an art piece and you have like a ton of different materials on the table, you're not going to go look at the stuff that you don't like. If you want to make a painting, you're not going to look at like all of your drawing materials and be like, I'm gonna let's just start with this stuff first. I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe that's not a great analogy, but you don't want to bring all of your attention to the things that you don't want. And I feel like that's kind of where we are, where we're like kind of forced into this corner because social media is such like an insular and it's kind of a monopoly right now.
Yeah.
We don't really have any other places to go. So what we see is a lot of clickbait and
Yeah.
things like that.
Right. What you focus on expands.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really, I think the more intentional that we can be with our moments, again, the more creative power that we can get in our lives.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily burying our heads in the sand from all the negative things, because obviously we have to pay attention to those things and know that they exist. But I equate it to like, you're like going down I don't know, a river in a kayak, and there's a bunch of whirlpools. Like it's like you're not gonna be like, oh, there's nothing there. It's just like that's toxic positivity right there. If you're like just not even gonna acknowledge it, but you got to acknowledge that it's there. But then you can be like, okay, well, I see it's there. Do I want to get sucked into that? I want to acknowledge it and figure out how I can uh, help the people that are in my boat go around this thing in the most effective way, or do I want to get sucked into it and then who knows when I'm going to get out?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes you think of, and then I'm going to talk about these art pieces behind you. It makes me think of when test pilots are doing simulations and there's obstacles
Mm,
that they find when the pilots focus on the obstacles, like the whirlpools you're saying with the kayak.
mm,
Like, yeah, they're there, and it's important to know they're there. It's like the toxic positivity of just being like, no, it's good. I could do whatever I want. There's no problem. It's like that's ridiculous. That's a pathway to destruction. But when you focus on the obstacles, they have found this in real time, like in a comprehensive way. When pilots in these simulations focus on the obstacles, they hit them. When they focus on the open space, they move through the open space, and it all comes down to like the brain doesn't perceive negatives. If I say don't think of an elephant, your brain just hears elephant and doesn't hear the don't. It doesn't hear the nt, right? So it just hears elephant. But if I say do think of a tiger, you're thinking of a tiger, and guess what? You're not thinking of an elephant.
yeah, yeah.
So in the same way, we can creatively construct our life by choosing where we bring our attention.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that kayak whirlpool thing, it's like, yeah, the whirlpools are there. Focus on the open water. Say,
Hmm.
I'm moving towards open water. I'm moving down these rapids in open water.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
And you know, it's interesting because like something that I just thought about too is that there was a saying about like race car driving. And it's a similar kind of thing. It's
Mm,
like if you're in a race car, and you're about to careen towards the wall, the first thing they tell you is like, don't look at the wall, look
mm.
away from the wall, so you can pull yourself away from that instead of going into it. Because like there's a crazy, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but it's like if you look at the wall, you have a higher percentage of actually crashing into it than if you're looking somewhere else and trying to focus on where you want to go instead,
Nice. Yeah, that's amazing.
which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, and it's cool because it's not just philosophy, it's actual practical use for people
Yeah,
who need it the most, and it works, and we
totally.
can apply it to our life.
Yep.
So, so with all this, so you've got art pieces behind you.
Yeah.
You've got, so you're a visual artist. You're also a musician. And so I'm curious about so many aspects of this. It took us a while to even get here. Like, that's why I love talking to you. There's just like
No,
there's
likewise,
so
man. Yeah.
much. Yeah. So when you mention, so let me ask this first. When you mention students, working with students, are you primarily doing that through music, or primarily doing it through visual art, or both, or where does that fall?
Primarily visual art.
Mm,
So yeah, a lot of my teaching philosophy is very holistic, kind of like, you know, in a sense, it's very much about meeting people where they are, and kind of focusing on a project that they're invested in and excited about. I mean, I have I've done a lot of different types of projects and things like that, so I have a broad range of experience in working in many types of things. And one of the cool things, like seeing a class of students come together that are all working in individual projects, is like what they can gain from each other from being in a classroom, even though they're all working in different mediums and different things like that.
mm,
So I had a class where I was teaching. I had one person that was working on a kid's book, another person was working on like portraits, and another person that was strictly just working on like watercolor landscapes and whimsical watercolors and things like that. So and they all kind of gained something different from interacting with each other in a really
mm.
cool way.
Beautiful.
Um, but yeah, my own teaching philosophy is mainly anchored in just like listening and really meeting people where they are, and focusing on where they want to go. And sometimes it's that their goal is to completely finish a project that they began, and other times it's really just kind of like they just want to make sure that they have the time to focus on creativity, uh,
Mm-mm. Yeah.
and they're not necessarily trying to, you know, be a full-time artist or anything like that. They just want to make sure that they have the time, um, to sit down with their materials and, you know, dedicate some time to themselves, because I feel like, you know, it is such a healing thing, you know,
Yeah.
it's so incredibly healing. And mainly because I think it's like we live in an uncontrollable world, so like, you know, being able to sit down with just a couple materials and just sit down and paint or draw or whatever for a little bit of time, it's like this is the stuff you can control. You know, you kind of control what's within the parameters of this page, what kind of materials I want to use and how I want to play.
Yeah.
And I think that's just like so lost today. It's like we're so used to like adulting all the time that we forget to play. And it's
Yeah.
so integral. It's just like, I don't know. I feel like our priorities are so back asswards,
Hmm.
in a lot of ways. It's just like
Yeah.
the arts are such a foundation to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
That makes me think, I've been saying this a lot lately, like in my breathwork groups and in different places, that there's this trauma psychologist I love, Peter Levine, and he talks about, I'm always paraphrasing this, but it's essentially that the state our brain is in as an effect of trauma and stress, the state that our brain is in, this state of play, curiosity, exploration, is the antithesis to that. So it's like he said something along the lines of like play, the state of play in the brain and the state of trauma don't coexist. They're the alternates, right? It's
Mhm.
like hot and cold. It's the other side of the scale. And so, if you think of, even if you just try to strip it way down, just say the opposite of stress is play, right?
Mhm.
Like I like to think of it that way for myself, even in terms of how I communicate with people, but also for how I experience it in my own life. And the idea, and the other thing about that is the idea that, like, like if we overconsume food, we will feel overly full. Like we'll start to see, we'll like start to gain weight in ways that don't feel comfortable, or like things like this, right? Like it's more obvious when we're over consuming. But
Mhm.
when we are over consuming media, we might feel like crap, but it's not necessarily as visually obvious. And especially when everyone's doing it, it's just the most normal part of the culture. So I think of time in terms of creating, consuming, assimilating, and communicating.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like all of our time is spent in one of those four categories. And it's amazing that you're creating this space for people to say, just to have the time to be in that state of creation. That it's like, you don't have to sell this. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, but you're taking time to be in the state of creation. Because I think out of all those I just named, we certainly spend hopefully a lot of time constructively communicating, but we spend most of our time consuming. And it's not as obvious as if we're overeating, but it's just as, maybe if not more, detrimental. So it's just beautiful that you create these creative spaces for people. It's fantastic.
I just think it's so important, and it kind of goes back into like what I was saying before. It's like, when you can stay in that state of creation, I think that is the thing that would change the world, because you're stepping into your own power instead of allowing other things. Like if you're just constantly reacting to everything else and consuming and reacting, like you have no agency. There's nothing you can do. It's like all you're doing is just sitting here fending off, like, whatever thought somebody else put out there on the internet that you read. Now you're like, then you're suddenly in a mind loop about it, thinking about this, thinking about that, just reacting to everything that's happening. And like, again, we can't ignore those things that are happening, but we can choose our perspective on those things, and we can choose what we want to do in that moment with it. It's never ever about what happens to us. Like this world is full of, nobody leaves here without trauma. Like people have different degrees of it, of course, but we all have some kind of trauma that is a base. And like but the thing where we have power is that we get to choose what we do with that. Like it's not about what happens to us, it's what we do with what happens to us. It's what we do in the next step. It always takes me back to this at some point Miles Davis said when he was playing, he was like, it's something like where if he hits a wrong note while he's playing jazz, if you do it again, like then it's jazz. It feels like it's like part of it. It was like it's part of this creative aspect. So it's like really not what you do with the wrong. It's like, or it's not with the wrong note itself. It's what you choose to do with that afterwards that creates the art. So it's like, again, like our creative power is right here. So whatever has happened to us is already in the past. Like it has no bearing on us unless we allow, except outside of the story that we're telling ourselves about what happened. And yeah, I mean, that's a really hard thing because, I mean, a lot of people have experienced some absolutely horrific things here, like the contrast can be so unbelievably intense. But there's also, I do believe that the amount of pain that we can feel here is exactly proportionate to the amount of joy and expression that we can also feel on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Beautiful.
Because if we can feel that much pain, then we also have the opportunity to experience and feel just as much joy on the opposite side, because that contrasts everything. There's a balance between everything, and there's, I think the middle way is a very real thing. We're always trying. If we can find that middle ground for ourselves, and that's going to be different for everybody, but if we can find that middle place for us to create from, instead of swinging too far either direction, we're going to have like, a much more empowered life. So yeah, I mean, it's like, it really is what we choose to do with it. And we all have those choices to varying degrees within the moments after our experiences. And yeah.
So it's beautiful that you create these held spaces for creativity for all these reasons, and not the least of which, as it pertains, we've done breathwork together, and so much of the reasoning and the discussion around breathwork is things that have happened to us in the past that have been brought in, that are continually brought into the present because they live in our soma, in our body, in our tissues, and how they inform the present. And so, so much of the breath work is about expression versus repression. And you are, with the art that you're creating and holding the space and facilitating, you're creating these spaces that facilitate expression. And that's part of like the things that have happened to us that we hold on to, whether consciously or unconsciously, whether in the mind or in the tissues in the body or both. Like creating these held spaces to facilitate expression is healing, like to the maximum. They're creative spaces, and we're able to do something with the energy that has been impressed upon us or repressed. since it's been impressed upon us, right? And I know, so I have a question about like, what do you notice, or what are your thoughts on, you know how some people say like kids are inherently, like children are inherently creative and expressive,
Mhm.
and then they'll paint, leave some paint and some stuff on a table, and kids will just start going nuts, like finger painting, colored pencils, whatever. They'll just go for it. Like, is there a certain age or a certain situation that starts to delineate who's an artist versus who's like, oh, I don't know how to be expressive, I don't know how to be creative? Like, when do you have a sense of when that shifts or why it shifts, or thoughts on
I
that?
mean, I feel like it's different for everybody, but I mean, the thing that students that I've taught preschoolers and I've taught people who are 95, a
Mm-hmm.
very broad range of people. I mean, yeah, kids are like always more connected. They don't have any responsibilities or anything, obviously. So like they can be fully tapped into play all of the time. They don't have to necessarily think as much about the real world because it's being all taken care of for them. And they also don't have, the same kind of baggage that, you know, having people tell them whatever their opinions are of their artwork. None of that has happened quite yet. Right? I feel like, a lot of that stuff like just kind of starts to get muddy, like probably, I don't know, like late elementary school, junior high kind of time where you're trying to really just you're going through puberty and you're like, starting to like think about like how, the opposite sex or the same sex, whoever like thinks about you, you want to be part of a group, you want to be, accepted. Like these are very like human and very important aspects to being a human being, being accepted into a group and like being able to be connected in a way like that. So I feel like that's a big time. And like, everybody has different interests, it's like you can find art in anything. Like we are just naturally creative like beings. Like there's art in math, like an incredible detailed amount of art. And honestly, if I was terrible in school when I was a kid. I did not do well. Like all of my arts classes were great. Everything else was just like a
Mm-hmm.
mess. But I wish one of my teachers had been like, science and math actually explain the universe. They help to explain the things that we like, a depth of things that are around us in a way that we don't necessarily always think.
Mm.
Um, I probably would have been more interested in it then. But most of my math classes were like, Sally has two pails of mayonnaise and Johnny has one. Like, add them together and blah blah blah. All those the stories about whatever those things. To me, they weren't interesting. But I feel like everybody is an artist. It's just really about flipping our understanding about what creativity and art is, and then owning the fact that we are artists. Like I
Mm.
think it's hard to I was talking to a friend of mine the other day and she was essentially like, even though she's an amazing musician, she was like, I'm not really an artist. I mean, I play with like art materials and things like that from time to time or whatever, but
Mm.
I don't think I'm an artist.
Mm.
And I always just want to push back on that because like, again, it's like it's really just speaks to like how ingrained these definitions are
Mm.
in our culture and how much we equate the concept of art with something to be consumed. Like,
Yeah.
and while like yeah, like it can be like I would consider myself as a profession. I'm a creator. Like that's just
Mm.
like kind of what I do. I like to do a lot of different things, and I just feel like life is a buffet, and like we're all artists. We just get to choose like what pieces we want to use to make our own masterpiece, I
Yeah.
guess, in our lives. I don't know if I went a little off the rails there, but hopefully I.
No, 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 no. Do
Yeah.
you have in terms of like day to day, right? Like people who have, because I'm thinking of this George Bernard Shaw had a quote, the playwright, he had a quote, something like, we don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing.
Yes, that's so
And so
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
like creativity, like being creative, like I know people like runners who feel like running is an act of creativity, or like people that do martial arts is an act of creativity. So again, it doesn't have to be, of course, limited to traditional, whatever people traditionally consider art, in whatever form. Like you could bring your creativity to a lot of things. But so do you have a suggestion for people who maybe, like in my case, right? I can't, you mentioned something earlier about everybody can sing. Like, listen, I've tried. I've been asked, like, as an actor, I'd been asked to do musicals, and I'm just sort of like, and I give it a go. I give it my heart. I leave my ego on at the door, and I'm just like, I'll just try to make some sounds here. Like, I'm I'm not a great singer. I also don't really know how to draw, whatever. But I will absolutely willing. Like, I think, well, one thing I will say is, as I've gotten older, I like in whatever form ego has been put aside. Again, I'll sing in front of people and I'll make an idiot of myself because I'll just be like, well, listen, you only live once, and like I might as well explore this. And same thing with art. Like I'll be, with friends or a girlfriend or partner, like I've done art where it's just like, hey, let's put some paints on the table and just create. And I'll like let myself be in that space. But that's taken time of letting the ego go aside and just be like, what does bad mean? I don't care. Let's just have fun, you
Mm-hmm.
know? But so all that to say, do you have like suggestions or ways to help that you help people who like maybe want some form of expression but are just like like maybe to some degree embarrassed or don't know where to start is probably a better way to put it. Just don't even know where to start with creativity. Or
Well, I would say, one thing that's been very helpful, and this is a common thing that I've noticed, people not being able to make time for their own art practice.
Mhm.
It's been a really common theme, and it's I think it's very challenging in today's world where people are just busy and stretched thin by a million different things.
Mm.
Um, but I think either joining a like maybe if you're a group that has a similar interest, so you can kind of show up for yourself, I think is the biggest thing. Just some kind of an accountability group.
Mm.
Um, I know that's something that's helped me in a lot of ways, sometimes where, it's tough to find the momentum and the inspiration sometimes, but then when you're around people and you're like, okay, I got to show up and do this thing by this time or whatever, like that can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you don't like, I think everybody's expression is so sacred. Um, and a lot of the time I feel like we're just so stuck in our heads about how we appear to other people, and we don't necessarily realize that by us showing up as our fully authentic selves and allowing ourselves to express ourselves in the way that shows up in that moment, how that can ripple out to the other people around us in incredibly powerful ways, because it's like a permission slip. It gives other people a permission slip to, like, show up and just play too.
Mm.
um, and it does take courage sometimes, because obviously we do live in a place where we're like constantly worried about the opinions of others, but
Yeah.
um that's where the inner work comes in. It's like
Yeah.
just recognizing that you are full and enough as you are. And it's interesting too, because I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about this, and I was like, for a long time when I was growing up, I felt very much like I wasn't like enough. Like there was something missing. There was something that I had to do or be in order to be like accepted or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older and you just have more life experience, I started to realize, okay, well, that what how self-centered is that,
Huh.
to believe that I like you're not enough out of all of the infinite pieces here that are
Yeah.
perfectly made exactly as they should be in their puzzle piece that's supposed to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how self-centered is it to think that you are the one thing that's like not enough,
Mm.
that there's something wrong with you? That is like, that's crazy. Like, that is so self-centered. So it's like, I think it's flipping that perspective on its head and realizing, like, put yourself outside of yourself
Mm-hmm.
and think about, instead of like, oh, what are other people thinking about me and what I'm creating, think about how can other people benefit from the mess that I make here right
Mm-hmm.
now, and the way I show up in this place, and how I choose to just squiggle a line on a paper, or how I choose to just sing, regardless of like how quote unquote good or bad I am. Like,
Yeah.
that's a unique and sacred expression, and like, there's, again, good or bad are totally subjective. They don't exist. They only
Yeah.
exist within our mind.
Yeah.
So when we can realize that and realize that everything is totally neutral and we're the ones who put a definition on it,
Mm-hmm.
like, we can easily step outside of ourselves and recognize that, like, we not only have a sacredness and expression, but we have a sacred obligation to, as humans, as being here in this moment, our obligation is to be as authentic as we can be and show up in our most authentic version of ourselves. There is nothing more holy and sacred than that, because that, I mean, that affects everything. That
Yeah.
affects so many more things that we could even begin to wrap our mind around, because every single person that you interact with is going to be affected by that in some way.
I love that. Yeah, that fantastic, man. Like, so the way you show up, I love how you said that, and I love how you came around to it again, the way you show up. And so like that the art that you're creating is secondary to the way that you're showing up to create it.
100%.
Like
Yeah.
that's fantastic. That is just like that is landing in me like my that's like a whole body experience right now. What you just shared about that, because it's like, and then so many offshoots of that, like the idea of what's good or what's bad. It's like, but people are like, yeah, well, if I'm making money off it, it's good, or if people like it, it's good. It's like, yeah, well, we all have infinite examples. Like, I think it was Herman Melville. He wrote Moby Dick. And I think when, like in his lifetime, what I remember about that is nobody liked that novel. Nobody liked it them years I again, I may be getting this slightly wrong, but it was something like 100 years after his death, people became obsessed with the book, and now it's one of the greatest American novels, like
That was
way after his death, whatever the time frame was.
totally.
Lavelle, and then they talk about Van Gogh again. He died absolutely, like Picasso enjoyed some success in his lifetime, right? But Van Gogh, not at all,
Yeah.
right? And so there, we hear these examples time and time again. So no, it is not about the product. Yes, you want to pay your bills being creative. Yes, 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 totally. And that's like a thing unto itself.
Mhm.
But at the core of it, how you show up is the art, right? I mean, I don't know. That's
Totally.
this is
It absolutely is. It
yeah.
absolutely is. It's like, and that's why I think, even making art, like because it takes you outside of like everything else. It allows you to just focus in on this one thing. And it's going to build your muscles for patience. It's going to build your muscles for, you know, I think in a lot of ways authenticity, because you're not necessarily focused on anything outside of you. You're focused on what you're bringing to the moment in that one thing, in that one way. And I was thinking too, like what you just said, like it was the same thing with the Wizard of Oz. It's like there that came out, and I was reading this review that some guy had written about it that was like just scathing. It was like the words, it was like Technicolor was terrible, blah blah blah. It was like, this is such a stinker. Well, time has told a different story, right? It's like one of the most classic movies ever.
Yeah.
So we don't know, again, like how our we don't know how our art is going to impact the world in future generations. We don't even know. We don't know. We don't know how things will happen. Our brains are only made to understand how things have happened before.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't know how things are going to happen. We don't know anything could happen. Like we don't know how our work is going to interact with anybody 100 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Like especially with the way social media is now. Like videos could be up for, I don't know, what, 100 years from now somebody could be watching this podcast. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
Who the heck knows? We have no concept. So that's why I think it's so important to understand that this moment right now is holy and sacred. It's the most important moment that we've ever lived in, and however we show up right now is everything. It
Yeah.
truly, it's so much more important than anything else.
Yeah. And there was another thing in this section, like that idea that it's not, as ironic as it is, that it's not about you, like that, like you said about this sense of being down on yourself and being like, well, who am I to be so about myself, even though it's in like a negative way, right? So I'll give a shout out. My friend Jen Lyon, she's a great actor. I haven't seen her in years, but we did a play together in 2015, and I still remember we were in the dressing rooms. Like everybody, it was cool. Like backstage, everybody visits each other's dressing rooms or whatever. And I was talking to my friend Jen, and long story short, she essentially highlighted this concept of negative narcissism. And she was like, because most people think of being obsessed with ourselves as a grandiose thing.
Mhm.
Like this person is so arrogant, they're so obsessed with themselves, right? And she was like, well, you could be negatively obsessed with yourself.
Totally, for sure.
And whenever she said it that way, I'm like, whoa, like, because I can tend towards, being hard on myself. A lot of us can't, and but after hearing that, I was like, whoa, because like if you tend to be hard on yourself, chances are that when you see someone who's like positive, you could say arrogantly obsessed with themselves, it's really obnoxious, right? Especially if you're negatively hard on yourself. And so But whenever it was framed that way, I was like, whoa, like narcissism can go either way. It could go to the positive, it could go to the negative, and the bottom line is you're being obsessed with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so even if like you're sitting there being like, oh, I created this art and this art sucks and blah blah blah, and like we could all get stuck in those loops, it's totally human. But if you reframe it to say, it's not about me, it's about how I showed up. Because if
Mm-hmm.
I showed up authentically, right, like all the things you're saying, if I showed up with my whole heart, if I showed up authentically, if I created this space for creativity to be authentic, that has
Mm-hmm.
a ripple effect, whether we see it in the media or not. I'm sure you see it in your groups all the time. I certainly see it in breathwork groups. I've certainly seen it in theaters time and time again. When people have an egolessness, that they're willing to be out there fully, and whether that means like they are willing to, I don't know, like what someone might say, like be silly or like make a fool of themselves, or like some random judgment that is not the point at all. When people show up fully like that, it's like you're going out on a limb in a sense. But if you're not thinking that it's about you, you're thinking about, by me having permission to be fully authentic, I am giving everyone else in here permission to be fully authentic and open-hearted as well.
Totally.
And that is so much more important than the product, quote unquote. You know what I mean? That it's, again, the way of showing up. Oh
You're
god.
totally,
Yeah.
you're totally right. Yeah, it's like it really is process over product, and I think it's the
Mm.
same thing with performance too. Really,
Yeah.
it's like the energy that you show up with
Mhm.
is so much more important than anything else. It's like, you could, I mean, you could get up there and sing a million wrong notes, but if you have like energy and you're like, you're there in the room and you're like, you're with the people and focused on that instead of like, oh, I don't know, I effed up this note, it was a little flat or whatever, like that's what people are going to remember. That's what
Yeah.
has the impact. It's like so much more of that than like the product of anything. And it's so
Yeah.
weird. Like we get so caught up in our heads about like all these minutia, like these tiny little details and things like, oh, I did that wrong. Oh, I did that wrong. But it's
Mm.
like, it's more about the overarching energy that we bring to every situation that
Totally.
has the ability to heal and connect us with
Yeah.
like people around us.
Yep.
Um, yeah, it's like, and that's why I think too, going back to what you were saying about this negative kind of narcissism versus like the other direction, it's like it really is like the middle way. It's like we're all in our own ways like trying to find this middle ground where we can kind of balance ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's going to be different for everybody, but that's
Mm.
like our one of our I think our sacred missions here is like to try to navigate all this contrast and find like a harmony between it all.
Mm.
uh, yeah.
Beautiful.
And honestly, for me, that's why a lot of my fine artwork is very much about that. It's very spiritually oriented. The stuff behind me, you can see like some of it's like drawing and painting, because a lot of it is about finding this middle way, this harmony between these kind of opposing dynamics,
Mm.
um, and this contrast that we have here. So it's like I use a lot of symbolism and things like that, but it all comes back to this like this this sense for balance, that we're looking for balance, and there's this kind of duality between everything,
Mm.
the seen and the unseen, that we're trying to find and alchemize in a way.
That's beautiful. I have a few things. One
Yeah, yeah.
is, like you're saying, like with performance showing up. So just to close that one, like also you like, yes, and because like you look at examples like Elaine Stritch or something, like people who like didn't necessarily have like these beautiful melodious voices, but they freaking slayed, right? But all this to say, you have the voice of an angel, so also easy for you to say your voice is incredible. Your voice is incredible, but also fully connected, to the point too. But your voice is gorgeous, and so we'll talk more about that. And then with with the visual art, like you're saying, like combining drawing with painting, what kind of like do you lean towards certain specific materials that you use, or do you vary it up a lot, or like what's your process there?
I mean, I've been doing a lot of mixed media, and I've actually been getting into a lot more oil painting
Mm.
lately. Because there's something I missed about that for a long time. But mainly, like I've always been kind of like a drawer. That's always been something that I've gravitated towards. And honestly, I feel like growing up, like honestly, art and self expression and music saved me. you
Mm.
I mean, I grew up as a closeted gay kid in the Midwest, and definitely was like super bullied in school and stuff, to the point where I had to like switch schools. So yeah, I mean, it was like, and we all, like I was saying, we all had trauma and stuff, but like art was really the thing that, like, again, it was the thing that I could control. It was the thing that I like, I know I'm going to come home and I'm going to like focus on this thing and just, I'm excited to make this thing, you know? And, so I've always gravitated towards drawing just because I always had a number two pencil in hand and,
Mm.
magazines. So I would like draw from magazines and stuff like that. And it was just something that I just ingrained into my life because again, like it was the one thing that I could like, that I actually had some say over, and I could bring what was inside out, um, in a way that was meaningful for me and in the best way that I could at the time. But maybe that's the reason that I value creativity so incredibly much, because of my own experience and also because of what I see, in the other people around me and the benefits that it has on being able to like sit down and just like spend that time focusing on again what you can control.
Yeah,
But yeah, drawing has always been like a really a strong point for me in terms of just like my connection to my artistry.
it's
uh,
beautiful.
yeah, and then singing, I was always, I don't know, I was like to do that. I did, I don't know, I was a scarecrow for like my talent show in first grade.
Nice, nice.
I just always, I don't know, I just always, self-expression is just such an important thing, I think. And like, you know, the more we can kind of tap into that play and allow that energy from our childhood to extend into our adulthood.
Mm.
um I mean, I feel like we have, again, like just, it's true, like a more empowered life, and we can shape the world into the amazing place that it's meant to be. You know, like I feel like we're here and like it could be your hell or it could be your heaven, you know? But
Mm.
if we empower ourselves in our own creativity and are able to collaborate and focus on the things that we want to make instead of the directions that we don't want to go,
Yeah,
we can make it heaven. Like, I mean, we can easily do that together.
yeah,
All things of choice,
that's
uh,
beautiful. And
showing up.
you know, and I love what you're saying too about having a number. You like, well, I always had a number two pencil,
Yeah.
right? That it doesn't always have to be like I've got my full thing here. Like we can find ways that we connect that
Mhm.
are expressions of creativity with something like a pencil, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, because again, I can't really sing, I can't really draw, but you know what? Like, there's got to be ways we could find. But you know, a big thing too about what you just said, and thank you for sharing about like growing up and you know that like how hard that must be and you know and never obviously it's just like you're a humble like sweet incredible human being but it's like yes you've had experiences that are and you know what is so incredible about what you're saying is that you channeled it into creativity and that I have heard so many writers artists people say you know what like I can't always control the twists and turns and the environments I'm in that are maybe unfair or like or messed up or whatever. I can't always control each bit of my life, but by having some form of creativity, I can take this energy that's been impressed upon me, you know, through situations or events or interactions, and I could take that energy and rather than again it being repressed and just being stuck in the body, I can channel it through creativity and
Mhm.
I can have a form of expression. You know, I've heard writers say, you know what? Like, yeah. So like take heartbreak, right? Like you know, my heart was broken, but then I was able to write an incredible scene or a film or a poem. And it's not like it takes away the heartbreak, but it gives a channel for it to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, then if you share that art or if you show up like we're saying you show up in that space first of all you showing up in that space energetically that creates a ripple effect then if other people see that art whether it's later today or 100 years from now or whatever they feel heart to heart they feel like they're not alone and that to me is the bottom line of everything is like when we show up authentically and when we express creatively and express authentically it lets us know and lets other people know that we are not alone and so there's so much power in what you just said about growing up and having these forms of expression and that's yeah thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like as people, we're just masters at transmuting
Mm,
energy. Like, and if we can alchemize that through any kind of creative process, and really anything can is a creative process, you know, like if we do it in our own way, it's really just about flow. It's like really tapping into whatever that flow is and whatever your passion is, you know, it's like,
mm,
and some people, I mean, maybe not everybody knows like what their passion is, but that's where I think you were saying before, it's like curiosity. Following that curiosity within yourself is
Mm,
always going to take you to your path and an interesting place. Like if you're even a little bit curious about something, like follow that itch, you know, like if it's even like literally, I mean, and I think a lot of times people think passion or curiosity has to be like some big inkling, like, oh, you know, I've never tried, I don't know, like collage work. I'm going to buy a bunch of magazines and make a collage or something. It doesn't necessarily have to do with that. It could be like, oh, you know, I'm kind of curious, like how it would feel after I took a walk, you know, or
mm,
I'm kind of curious about how it would feel after I, you know, maybe if I do the dishes and clean this place up a little bit, like how am I going to feel? You know, those little things are curiosity too, and like following those things are going to give you space. They're going to give you space to be. Um, and like I was saying before, it's like I think we're all trying to like we're trying so hard, way too hard to become something, to achieve things. Like, and a lot of that is because of our culture, but the reality is like you don't have to do anything. Like, does a tree have to do something in order to become a tree? Like,
mm,
it is. It's
mm,
just about being, you know, it's in the creative process. It's just existing in a continuous creative process. And by doing that, it automatically becomes what it's supposed to be.
mm,
You know, but as people, we're constantly like trying so hard to be like, oh, I have to do this, or I have to do this by a certain age, or like this is how it has to be. We're trying to plan things out,
mm,
and always push and always being stressed out. But like, you know, it's the weird dynamic is that letting go sometimes and most often is the key to becoming all that we're meant to be, when we're able to like actually let go of things and release the things that never really did belong to us but that we just took on.
mhm.
We can then be like, oh, I'm back in the creative process because I've let go of this material that was no longer suiting me for this painting that I'm making now, you know, this general life painting, you know,
Yeah.
it's like it's going to release this other thing and make space. Cause like once we release something, suddenly this amazing space opens up for us. And that's where we can create this empty space. That's where it all begins.
That's so beautiful. That's beautifully said. That's beautifully said. As you were saying that, I got the image of like a dam breaking, you know?
Mm.
And like
Mm-hmm.
ironically,
Mm-hmm.
so let me see if I could get this because I just want to like kind of call like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the idea that being creative is seems like it's doing something, but the feeling that I was getting as we were talking through that was like I ironically or interestingly, like by creating the space to be creative or to allow that creativity, it actually allows us to be more ourselves, so it's quote unquote doing less.
Yeah, for
Like
sure.
it's almost like by not being in some kind of creative space, we're actually like there's a dam, there's a wall up,
Mm-hmm.
but by allowing the space, we're doing not we're like doing less, we're doing nothing, but more is happening because there's more
Yeah,
flow
totally,
of
for sure.
energy or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it's like it's not like I don't want to equate it with like, oh, you're not gonna have to work, you know, or do work hard for something.
Sure.
You do have to work hard, but it doesn't feel like work because
Mm,
it's in the flow. You're being, you know, you're
yeah.
excited about what you're doing, you know, like you're engaged. And so you're working your ass off, but it doesn't feel like it
Yeah,
half the
the
time.
curiosity.
It's like
Yeah.
in it. And so it's just things are evolving and unfolding in the exact way they're supposed to.
That's
Um,
beautiful.
yeah.
So fantastic. Well, so thank you for talking today. And I want to ask too, so do you have art shows? Do you have classes? Do you have music shows coming up? Tell me all the things you got going on, or if you've got some stuff coming up, or how to best get in touch with you, things like
So
that.
I do. Right now, I'm getting ready to teach a mentorship course that opens next week through Mastrius. It's 8 people minimum. It's going to be kind of an ongoing mentorship course. It's not necessarily, there's not really a syllabus to it. It's basically people show up each week and we talk about their art practice. I'll give them feedback on whatever project they're working on. Again, people can work on oil painting, people can work on kids' books, whatever they want to work on. It's just an open space for creativity and creative discussion, honestly. And it meets only once a month, so it's a very low commitment. But there's homework and stuff, so people have that support. And also, Mastery, it's a fantastic platform because there's a bunch of other opportunities that are there under that umbrella too.
Mm,
But that starts next week, and then it will be once a month after that.
mm-hmm,
In terms of music, I am actually so I have 2 singles that I released last year, and my music is very much focused on a lot of it is focused on like inner healing, but also outer healing across the board, you know. So I authenticity is incredibly important in all of my expression. But I have a show that I'm opening for Leah Valentine next month, and she's doing a gig at Silica Studio in Beacon, so I'm going to be opening for her, which is exciting. And then I'll also be doing some more stuff with them through the year. But I also wanted to mention too. So here in Beacon, I'm also working on a kids book right now. That's a collaboration for a really good cause. There's this foundation called the Beacon Unicorn Fund that was just created, and essentially there's a whole backstory there that will be in the book. But it's very close to my heart because the fund is essentially set up to help people who are in financial hardship in the area of Beacon. So all the funds that go into that are going to basically be helping people in that situation. But it's about a magical unicorn. So the kids that I've shared it with so far are excited.
Nice.
But yeah, that'll be out in the summer. So yeah, I'm kind of at the moment just like taking things on as they come. Definitely anticipating a very, very busy and exciting year. But yeah, just taking it day by day, trying to stay in the middle way so I don't get too overwhelmed, and yeah, just balancing the stuff that I can as well as.
Beautiful. So that's Beacon, New York, in the Hudson Valley, and then the course, the monthly meet, that's online, correct?
That's online, yeah.
Cool.
And then I do offer private lessons too, both in person and online as well. And I have multiple private students that I work with in that capacity.
Awesome. And will you share your Instagram, website, whatever best way to reach out or check out your stuff?
Yeah, totally. So you can check out my website, my art website. It's chrisamsart.com, and it's Ames, AMS. So weird, three letters. There's a story behind that too, but yeah, it's a very short last name. And then you can check out my Instagram is at Chris Ams Official. So you can find me there. And there's a link tree so you can find my music and all that stuff through that. And yeah, all the links are there. And then my email is chris@chrisamsart.com. So if anyone wants to reach out, has any questions, I mean, I'm happy to chat at any point for sure about anything and everything.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you, Chris. I will
Thank you,
talk to
Jon.
you.
Yeah.
I will talk to you soon. And
Awesome.
see you next time, everybody. Thank you for joining Mindfulness Unscripted. You could reach out anytime at jonorsini.com, JONORSINI, on Instagram at Jon Orsini, and on YouTube at Mindfulness Unscripted. We'll see you next time.